Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Maker's Playbook. This week, we have another interview with a fellow maker, and honestly, I've been sitting here trying to record this intro for about 20 minutes. Because frankly, I think for most of our listeners out there, at least the potters in the crowd, this week's guest doesn't really need much of an introduction. But if you haven't read the title yet, then let's try a fun little guessing game. This week, I'm chatting to someone about what it took to go from a little independent woodfire ceramic studio to an industrial production. We talk about the importance of taking time to determine your long-term vision and goals for the future in order to figure out what the right next steps to take today and tomorrow are. Not to mention, when that vision involves a much bigger production than the original plans, how your role, responsibilities, and your entire day-to-day changes. This maker, along with a crucial team of support, is building a business we can all look to for inspiration when it comes to building opportunities that not only are, yes, obviously good for business, but also good for our communities and the world. Any guesses? I mean, there aren't that many industrial-sized craft pottery studios in the US, so the options were pretty short to begin with. Okay, I'm just going to get on with it because I clearly can't actually hear if you have any guesses. This week, I am virtually sitting down with none other than Alex Matisse, founder and chief strategy officer of Eastfork Pottery. Hey, Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
I'm rather ecstatic, I'm not going to lie, because when I first started the podcast, I sat down and made a wish list of my top guests, and you guys were definitely high up there. So before I sound like some crazed fangirl, if you were meeting somebody for the first time, how would you introduce yourself?
I usually just say I'm Alex. I don't go into details.
Okay, well, maybe at like a business venture.
Oh, right now my title it's long and clunky. We just went through a big executive shift, which we can talk about in detail, but my title is founder and chief strategy officer and board chair, but that's separate, of Eastfork. So I grabbed back the title of founder in this switch because right after I finished 3 years of apprenticeship, bought a piece of property, I built a kiln and started making pots. And then John and Connie joined. And Eastfork today is what it is because of the three of us and all the other amazing humans that have sort of helped us on the way. But at the end of the day, none of this probably would have existed if I didn't buy this funny little farm in the middle of nowhere and decide to make pottery. So,
are you guys, I know you're in more of a manufacturing kind of space now, but how far is that from the original farm?
So the original farm was an old tobacco farm about 40 minutes outside of Asheville in a very mountainous county. And yeah, it was just in this little holler and it was dark. And I built the kiln and a workshop and everything was fairly rudimentary. The workshop had a dirt floor, which was trained through my apprenticeships, and everything was heated with wood, and it was very bucolic and dreamy. And that's how we operated for a number of years, firing the large wood kiln a few times a year, selling pots to people, to collectors in the Southeast. And then when we made this switch, when it was clear, I mean, we grew out of that space, we rented some more space in conjunction, and we were moving pottery all over Madison County, and it was a total kind of a nightmare. And we eventually decided we needed an actual industrial space, like something with a loading dock, even though the building we found has the worst loading dock ever to be built, ever. But yeah, so we moved into 14,500 square feet, which at the time felt just like a total cavernous. And now it's completely full. And we've got another 30,000 square feet that we're building out right now, which is where our warehouse is, where we ship things from. And we're moving some production over there as well. So
when you bought that farm, was the vision to grow in the way that you have grown, or has this just happened as the demand has come, or what?
The vision initially was just to make my work, to make pottery. And I had finished these very sort of specific formal apprenticeships with two different potters in North Carolina. and was trained in a school of making. Mark learned from the person he apprenticed with, who learned from, so it's like a multi-generational passing of a way of doing something, a way of thinking about pottery. It's very different from the education that you'd get in an MFA program or going to college or going to a community, taking community classes. Like, it was a real sort of this pursuit of excellence through a very specific lens. And it was very technical, and you're throwing the same piece we would make boards of something. So you'd have a 5 or 6 foot board, and you'd sit there and it'd be next to your wheel, and you'd throw and you'd fill that board up, and then the teacher, whoever you're working for, would come over and critique it and say, okay, well, these look pretty good. You could do a little bit better here. You could pull a little weight out here. They'll do a demo. So your sort of vision of perfection is whoever you're working for. That's what you're trying to emulate, and you're trying to learn the skills and get that in your hands just through repetition and osmosis.
Yeah. Did you come out of traditional schooling into apprenticeship, or did you know straight from, when you were born or something very, I mean, that's really cheesy, but, what's the step before that is what I'm getting at.
Clay has always been the thing. Like, clay has been the medium that I've always loved. I come from a long line of artists in the family, and for me, there was just too much pressure to be, say, a fine artist or a painter or something like that. I had no interest in kind of being held next to some of the people like my great-grandfather, for example. But clay was, I don't know, there was something about the medium to me it's very physical. Like, making pottery is a physical thing, and I love the physicality of it. I just love the qualities of it. And then the whole process behind it, and the chemistry and all the gear that it takes to do it. So it's just this really dynamic medium that I've always loved. So 5th grade, I basically started to make things out of clay, and I did it through high school. And then in college, I decided to go to college and not do something artistic and to do something academic. I had taken a year off between high school and college and worked construction. I've always worked construction or worked in a garage or something like that. I like working with my hands. And I got to Guilford College in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is a great little sort of Quaker-esque school, or it was founded by Quakers, and was totally miserable, and walked into the ceramic studio and said, hey, could I hop in? Like, the semester had already started or something, and never left. Except for the next year and a half, I ran through all the courses that they offered because it was a small program. So I was looking at doing a couple of years of independent study before I would graduate, and I just wanted to get to work. So I was connected through Guilford to a potter named Matt Jones, and I would go out and I'd help him fire, because the firings are a big event where it takes a lot of people and time, and you're with the kiln overnight, everything else. So I'd help him fire, and my friend Alex, whose wife, who I also went to Guilford with, actually now works for us, which is very funny. But he was the apprentice there, and he was leaving. He said, "Do you want to take my place?" And I said, "Sure." So I just dropped out after a year and a half and went out there and did 2 years of apprenticeship with Matt Jones. And then I went to someone that he had worked with, the other side of the state, and I did a year of what Mark called finishing school. And Mark's English, and then moved back to Asheville, where I had some friends, and I had an inheritance that my grandfather had left, and I bought the property out in Madison County. And I didn't call it Alex Matisse Pottery, I think for some reason that was intentional, but I didn't know exactly what the purpose of that was at the time. I called it Eastfork, which was the kind of area that it was located in, and started making pots and selling them. Yeah.
And there it is. Simple as that. If only.
Yeah. Well, simple and lucky. I always like to preface that there's a lot of luck, a lot of fate that I had nothing to do with, that created a lot of circumstance.
And I also imagine a lot of having the, I don't know if it's risk tolerance, guts, ignorance, whatever it is, to say, okay, I'm a year and a half into school, but peace out, because that's like a break with the with the path that we're all taught from such a young age, that you do this, then you do this. And for plenty of people, it would be completely normal and natural to finish out the 4 years and then do the apprenticeship, and then how much might have changed in that time period.
Absolutely. Yeah. College to me, for some reason, like looking back on it now, you have 4 years where you're being fed and you get to party and you go to some classes, and sounds pretty fun. But at the time I was so serious, and I have been that way kind of my whole life, but just focused on digging into something and getting going on it. And I didn't find it there, but I did find it when I walked into this guy's workshop. And yeah.
That's awesome. I have to ask one brief question. I'm not going to stay on this topic long, but it just, like, I feel very foolish because it just dawned on me. You briefly mentioned your great-grandfather, and then all of a sudden I thought about your last name and went, oh, are we talking about that Matisse?
Yeah, you're one of the first people that, which I have to say is wonderful, and it's the thing that I love most about Eastfork and what Eastfork has done, which is that when it was just me and I was making pottery myself, that part of the story was a big thing. People love that. They come out and say, oh my God, can you sign the bottom of the piece or whatever? And what I love so much now is that so many people that follow Eastfork have no idea that I come from one of the most famous art families in the world. Like my great-grandfather was Henri Matisse, my step-grandfather was Marcel Duchamp, and my grandfather was Pierre Matisse, who had a gallery in New York. This was one of Matisse's sons. Pierre brought over Chagall, Giacometti, just a huge host, Miro, of all the modern art greats, and introduced them to the U.S. essentially. So yes, that's my background, heavyweight art background. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hence, it would make sense for anyone if you're in the situation where both your parents do the same job, or you have this family legacy of, I think about vineyards in Italy where the family's owned winery for generations and generations. There's just that expectation, right? But especially in the arts world, it makes sense that the craftsmanship is something separate. Unfortunately, there's still this kind of divide, it seems like, between ceramics and the making community as opposed to the fine art, and being able to separate from those two makes logical sense to me. But
yeah. What you're saying around expectation, and you were talking about dropping out of college, like the expectation is that you do something, in my family, was that you do something and you do it passionately and seriously, which is how Matisse did everything. So for me, dropping out of college wasn't a big thing. When I went and worked in a garage, my dad looked sideways at me and said, "Are you going to do this for the rest of your life?" Which we can unpack, but we don't need to.
We'll leave that for therapy.
So again, yeah, if you're raised in a family of bankers and you want to be a banker, it's pretty easy. If you're raised in a family of artists and you want to be an artist, it's relatively easy. So I never struggled with any sort of my family being like, "What are you doing?"
Sure. Yeah. Getting back to the Eastfork we all know and love now then, because we can dive down that rabbit hole, I'm sure, for days. But to me, Eastfork is also doing something differently than what so many potters out there are doing it, in terms of, I mean, there are now endless single maker selling their wares online kind of thing. And there's a couple of different trains of thought I'd love to go down with you. One in just the actual business model and how you guys are making this all work. But also the other big piece to me is, as an outsider looking in, you guys, I don't know when it started, but seem to have rooted the Eastfork brand in also taking a stance in society and putting your money where your mouth is, really, when it comes to, like, you've built a business, it's a strong business, but also you're making that business hold a place as far as what you guys see as being the needs of your community and social justice issues and all of that. So those are kind of I don't know where we want to go first.
You pick. We can talk about both of them.
As someone who has her own little independent business, what are the cons of being the size that you guys are and the business model that you have?
Your life changes dramatically. Your work changes dramatically. The stakes are obviously higher. You've got 100 or so people's employment that if Eastfork went out of business, people would find new jobs and their lives would go on, but you do feel quite a bit of responsibility there. I think the biggest con is that you really have to be okay with you're going to be spending all of your time not doing the thing that you originally started doing. You're going to be spending your time learning new, exciting skills, and you can take a craft approach to growing a business, which is what we have done in a nutshell, but you're not necessarily going to be doing the thing that you loved to do. And I don't actually just started throwing a little bit recently, but I haven't thrown in a couple of years at this point. So it's really dynamic. There are a lot of people and humans and emotions to manage and to try to keep happy, or I don't know. It's the people management is really challenging. It's really hard, and we're learning as we go. But to me, I think that's been probably the most challenging aspect of it. Learning how to lead, learning how to actually know what that means. The business stuff we picked up along the way, but none of us were MBAs. We didn't go to business school. We were artists, craftspeople, potters, cooks, writers, like activists. And so that's what's instilled Eastfork. And that's what separates Eastfork from, say, some of these other direct-to-consumer brands that are out there selling pottery that's made in Portugal, putting ads up on Facebook. If you look at us side by side without just sort of point blank, you pull up two websites and look at them, there are a lot of similarities, but the type of business that we're growing is so much different from those companies and the way and the reasons that they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like the way you're talking about it, that those values were rooted right from the beginning. It was almost like you have no other way of being. And
not exactly. I think as we started to grow and we started to read more and talk to more people about business, we started to realize that, one, you have to be pretty intentional as you start moving into a place where you've got 20 people or more. You have to be intentional about what you're growing. So we didn't set our values, our mission, vision, and values until a few years ago, right before we actually moved out of the old pottery, or maybe we had just moved into the factory, I can't remember, but we had someone come out and lead us on this exercise to write a mission statement, write a vision, which is a broad, expansive story or view of the future that you're hoping to create in your organization. So we looked 10 years out and basically just wrote a descriptive document of what our life looked like and what Eastfork looked like. And then we did our core values as well. And it's been very helpful to have those, especially the vision, I think, is really an important thing that people don't always map out. And you can use that practice of doing a vision exercise or visioning for anything. Like you could do it for the date that you're going to go on with your partner. You can do it for your personal life. You can do it for your business. You could do it for a $100 million business. You could do it for a business that makes whatever.
Yep.
Yeah.
I started practicing that in a different way last year even, and it's given me so much focus to actually deciding, there's so many distractions. If you're researching how to grow something, all of a sudden, there's Instagram ads, or there's this, or I should learn this. And I'm constantly wanting to learn new things, and it's interesting to me, and I think that's part of what suits that entrepreneur brain. But at the same time, you start getting distracted. You don't actually move forward on any one given goal. And when you have that vision, at least for myself, it's been giving that directive and that goal to say, okay, these things are interesting, but we have to slate them because right now I'm focusing on XYZ because it's going to serve that vision.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And you can back your way into a strategic plan to get to that vision. It can be overwhelming starting at the beginning and trying to build the foundation, not really knowing the destination. But if you let yourself dream as big as you care to dream, and then you work your way backwards from that to build that roadmap.
So is there a tipping point or some point in which you're at the farm, you've got the wood kiln, you're making and throwing pots in that style, and then what you guys are doing now is radically different. So was there like a point in which you said, okay, we're going to hit a ceiling, or we can't go any farther than this, we need to make a shift?
There was a tipping point so I was out there, and I met Connie almost immediately when I bought that property and moved out there. And she ended up moving in like a couple months after we met, but she wasn't working sort of full time for Eastfork. She would help out. She was definitely a part of life, and she would help fire the kiln. And she started doing the Instagram way back when. If you scroll through our Instagram, if you get to the beginning of it, it's very different from what it is now. And so Connie was already there. We were already partnered. And then my friend John, who had also done the same type of apprenticeship that I had done in the same family, essentially, called us up and said, "Hey, what do you think about me coming out and us working together when you're done?" And John and I exchanged a series of letters back and forth that are really fun to read now, because in it we actually laid out, and John laid a lot of what's happening out in those letters before he came out. When he came out, we were firing the wood kiln. He was making his pots. I was making mine. They were stamped Eastfork. John had his name on his, and I had my name on mine. And we sold them, and it was a little confusing. People were like, "Well, John, you're an apprentice," or what exactly is going on here? Because it's just an unusual format for people in that sort of world. That type of pottery collector had a hard time with it. And one of the things we talked about was having a line that we could just make, and we could sell it to potentially a wider audience. We didn't have to photograph every piece because they would be more uniform. And to do that, we were going to fire them in a gas kiln, not in the wood kiln, because the wood kiln is so labor intensive. There is no uniformity, or there's very little uniformity. But we did a project for Calvin Klein Home, which is now defunct. But we did this project where we were making some pieces for them, and they were fired in the wood kiln, and it was just a total mess. And we made them, and I brought them up there, and it was all fine. But that was really where we if we're going to try to explore a world outside of North Carolina pottery, we need to do something drastically different. So we bought a kiln made in the Netherlands called a Blauw kiln. And it was like going from driving, this is the reference I use all the time, but it's like going from driving in a Conestoga wagon to buying a Tesla and then just driving away in the Tesla. They both move you through time and space, but in very different ways. So we made a run of pots. We designed this kind of line, which is essentially the same what we make now. Like all of the forms we make now originated from what we were throwing by hand. So if you go on eBay or you look on the trade accounts on Instagram or whatnot, you can sometimes find the really old pots, the hand-thrown pots. And we very painstakingly took the line and tried to capture the essence of that piece without putting in fake throwing rings and things like that to create what we now produce in an industrial fashion. The very first kiln opening, when we were announcing this, normally people come out early, they're lined up, they're waiting for you to basically show them the new load of pots that you've got, and there's a big line of 30 or 40 people queued up outside. And we sent out postcards for this new line, which was just plain, it was just color on clay, not wood fired. And 9 o'clock rolled around and nobody showed up. It was total crickets. And I think by maybe 11:30, one car rumbled up the driveway to come and poke around and see what we were up to. But it was kind of overnight. We turned off one customer base and then had to build up this new customer, which we obviously eventually did. But
I was going to say that, yeah, I mean, a wood fire look to a gas look is a completely different beast. It's a completely different style. So it makes sense talking about it in hindsight, but I imagine that had to have been a gut check also. If this was the only thing you guys are doing, this was the main thing, you had grown an audience and a sustainable, repeatable audience, and now all of a sudden you basically started all over again.
Yeah, we did to an extent. We thought that the line would support us. We'd make pots for the line. We'd maybe have some apprentices making work for the line, and then we would go and fire the wood kiln as well. But it did quickly shift to where people started buying it. We put it online, and we never ended up firing that wood kiln again, actually, after that.
Which is a little sad feeling for those of us that have dipped our toes into the wood firing world and how quickly addicting that is.
Yeah, it is. It is. It was really sad when the kiln was taken down because I sold that property and I couldn't bear to tear the kiln down myself, and I gave the bricks to a couple potters in town in exchange for them taking it down, palletizing everything, and carting it off. So the bricks are being used and they're getting hot and making new pots now. But
you'll have to partner with some of those guys now that you've got a little more time on your hands again to maybe tiptoe back into the wood fire.
The dream is eventually when we settle into a campus that is sort of our forever home, so to speak. So we've got a significant amount of growth to get through over the next 3 years. This year, we've invested in a huge amount of new machinery, new automation, new processes, and it's going to take our production capacity up to about 1 million pieces a year. Yeah, for big pottery factories overseas, that's not a lot. But in the US, there's really not very many places left that are making on that scale, like 1 or 2 maybe. So we'll have that capacity. After we hit that, then we'll pick everything up from both of our locations and settle in what will be our kind of forever home, where we can continue to expand on the same property, blah, blah. We haven't found it yet, but
sure.
That'll be the process. Part of that is having, our small batch studio, which is where our first employee, Cade, who makes all the small batch work, so that small batch studio can expand. More people can come in, develop an apprenticeship program, again, potentially build upon it, add our own flair to it, and maybe have a wood kiln and fire that wood kiln. So lots of ideas for the future, but we've certainly got our hands full.
Well, and you mentioned a while back building a craft business, and I realized the way I heard you say that at first, it could be taken in 2 ways. On the one hand, it's like, oh, okay, you are making an item, and that is a craft business. But the way I heard it first was thinking about a craft business in the sense of having this different ethos and value system rooted at the bottom of it almost being like a different business model as opposed to what you're actually making, I guess. I don't know if that makes any sense. But hearing you talk about working in apprentices and stuff, I think of that again.
Yeah, I use that word now not as literally as I used to. And I get asked all the time, do you miss doing your craft? And my response is that I have a sort of different definition of craft at this point, which is it's the care and the attention that you give to whatever it is that you are doing, whether you're sweeping the floor, like you can bring a craft to sweeping the floor. So I look at sort of the way that we're building the business and how we're approaching problems and how much we don't take the easy way a lot of times in dealing with things. So I speak about that as that has been my craft for the last few years, has been building this business with my co-founders and everyone else here. Are we a craft business? No, we're not a craft business at this point. We make things with giant machines and large quantities, and they're the same. And there's craft to what we do. Absolutely. And there's craft to various processes and things that are happening on the floor that take a long time to learn. But what we're very careful not to do is we want to be very clear about how we're making things and what we are and what we're not doing. And I want to make sure that we continue to embrace things like automation, like these sort of big, scary words, bad words, because this goes back to our values and my vision. A lot of it now has become about the people that we serve as leadership in the organization and our employees. And it's really hard when you reach a scale to provide the way that you want to provide as a business and an organization if you don't embrace these things. Like, you cannot pay people $20 an hour and be content to do things the same way that you've been doing them, because it won't work. The finances will not work. There'll be no money at the end of the year. Or maybe halfway through the year. So you have to constantly embrace these things. And that's what I try to steer people back to as we go through these changes, which are sometimes hard for people that get attached to a process like jiggering. Like, there is a new piece of equipment coming that will replace an entire process that we do. It will not replace the team or the people because we're growing, and they're going to move to different teams and new processes and learn new things, but their work will change. And that's really hard. That's really tough for people. I get that. But at the same time, I'm holding this sort of long-term, another set of values that's a more sort of global across the organization of what type of jobs do we want to offer. And sometimes we're going to make that change, and it's maybe tough for someone, but I want to be able to offer a job to the single mom at the Linamar plant who's working third shift down the road, getting paid $15 an hour. Her grandma has to come over every night to watch the kids while she's at work. And I want that person to be able to come here and walk in and just be like blown away by the fact that you're cooked a hot meal here twice a week. Yeah, you're paid $20 an hour. You've got great benefits. Like, to me, that's one of the big motivating factors of doing this. And it's one of the motivating factors of continuing to grow, to make more impact, to make, obviously, there's philanthropic impact that we make in the community, and that continues to grow as we grow. Our impact around being a kind of like a lighthouse for other organizations, that's a way that you make impact, by showing others that there are different ways to do things and different ways to function, in the same way that Patagonia has been a lighthouse for me as I've built Eastfork. And then also to provide people internally pathways to continue to move through the organization. And I want people to be able to spend their life working at Eastfork if they want to. Be making, after a couple of years, $70,000 a year and living a comfortable life, who wouldn't necessarily have that opportunity in as easy a way as, Sorry, that was a rant.
No, that was fantastic, because one of the questions I wanted to ask you about specifically was that you guys just had announced, $20 an hour is a big deal, especially with the size of the team that you guys have. And I've had a part-time employee, and I have 1099 photographers that work with me, and I know just even in that capacity how difficult it is to make the numbers work, let alone healthcare benefits and all the rest of it. So I think that's an incredibly powerful place to be.
Yeah, it's interesting. Another thing is, we're a values-driven organization, and people internally were obviously happy about it, but people externally really reacted too. Like, when we announced that post on Instagram, it was one of the most engaged with posts that we've ever done. So you can say it pays to be good. This is what, Patagonia says this in their books. Running a good business, being good to people, is also good for business at the end of the day. Yeah, that $20 minimum wage increase added $1 million payroll over the entire year to our break even. So it wasn't a small thing. And the $20 is actually not our target. Our target was $22.50, which is the living wage target set by MIT for two parents with two children, both parents working. And $22.50 is for Asheville. That's the minimum wage to make that work. And so that's where we want to be eventually. But for me, that's always been a dream. You can go work at GE and get paid $20 an hour. You'll get drug tested, which is why they have a hard time finding people to work in Asheville. But
yeah, you're not stopping there. Talking about providing a meal, talking about some of the stuff you guys have talked about online, just as far as the representation. Childcare is something that we're really interested in doing at some point. Like, when we move into the new space, eventually having on-site employee childcare subsidized by the organization. We've talked about getting some housing stuff. Expanding the meal program, obviously. That's awesome. All that. Yeah. Well, for somebody who is working on a much, much, much smaller scale right now, listening, is there a way that you feel like people can take these concepts and implement them in a way on just that independent artist maker scale? Like, how? Because I guess I'm thinking, on the one hand, somebody might argue like, well, you can do all these big, bold moves because you guys are so big. But on the other hand, I'm thinking it's scarier to do it when you're so big. Because like you said, you do have all these people relying on their jobs from you. And so there might be ways to implement things on a smaller scale. I feel like if you don't start early, you're not just going to magically start doing this once you hit $1 million in revenue.
I will say it's hard. Like, you do need to just get out and do the thing and do it messy and mess up and learn a lot. You're not going to put everything in place in the very beginning at all. Like, we're still putting things in place right now. As far as things that we talk a lot about, and this is sort of something, another future project, is how can we look through whatever resources we've built internally, whether that's knowledge resources, financial, like accounting kind of support, things like that. How can we help people, small businesses, to either crack the nut of hiring their first couple folks or embracing some technology? How can you access debt? Where are you going to find that money? How do you take those first steps? Because those first steps are usually the hardest to take. So that's something I'm really excited about. John, our CFO, co-founder, I want him to build out like a sort of forecasting and modeling tool that people could use in Google Sheets. So you could download it, you could plug in all of your costs and your fixed costs, your variable stuff, and it would spit out all the information that you're going to need to know and run courses on that sort of thing. That's all stuff we want to do. You want some more actionable things, I'm sure. But I think first understanding what you're trying to do and how are you trying to get big? Are you trying not to? I love talking with, the resource that I can offer is if somebody, and I do this all the time, if people reach out and ask, if somebody's interested in taking what they're doing, primarily it's people that are working in clay, but it doesn't have to be clay, and they want to talk about it, I'm happy to talk to people about it. I love talking to people about what they're doing and how they're thinking about growing or not growing, and what are some of the pitfalls and challenges that I see in their plan, or what were some of the things that we stumbled with in the beginning. But certainly one of the biggest things and one of the hardest things is that if you're a solo maker, that's really hard. I can't stress enough the importance of finding a partner. It doesn't have to be not a spouse necessarily, but somebody that can share that burden. And hopefully they have a different skill set than you, because we all have an innate skill set, and there's assessments you can do. The Enneagram stuff is great. There's all sorts of different assessments, but understanding what you're really good at and what you thrive doing and what brings you joy is super important, because I'm a financial clusterfuck. Like it's embarrassing. If John hadn't come along and had an innate ability to do that, this wouldn't have happened. If Connie hadn't been there to have a voice and tell the story to the world, and then shape a lot of the values that are driving us internally, and have that bold spirit, we wouldn't be doing this. And if I didn't have a high risk tolerance and a belief that we could do something really big and take over the world, we wouldn't be trying either. So I think doing it by yourself is hard. If you can think of the thing you want to do and the size, and then start thinking about that team, and like a co-founder essentially can be really helpful, because you just drown in it all. You drown in the bookkeeping, you drown in the customer service, you drown in hacking. It's so challenging. So
just even getting through packaging one Christmas season.
Yeah, exactly.
And I also like the point you made a point of saying, whether you're intentionally staying small or large, because as someone who, 5-6 years ago started to grow a team, and then absolutely had those growing pains like you're talking about, of learning how to manage people. And that's a huge growing pain, and realizing the cons that come with growing. And even because of COVID, kind of coming around to actually maybe small is the solution to the life vision that I have, as opposed to trying to have some bigger team and events and all this kind of stuff. So it doesn't have to be, the answer isn't always to get big, is what I'm getting at here that I wanted to.
Oh God, no. The answer should, if you can make it work and stay small, then that's fantastic. Like, we haven't been profitable for 4 years since we started growing. Like, we've had to finance that growth through equity investment and selling parts of the business and doing all of these things and raising money. And it's really hard there's examples of people at various stages where you zone in on what I would call like a plateau of stability. Below it, you probably don't have the exact team in place that you need to run efficiently and do what you need to do. But you have to find that plateau of stability, and it could be with 3 people, or it could be with 1 person. You have to just figure out how you want to make that work. Like, John Pandolfi is a ceramics studio in New York who makes a similar thing to what we do, primarily focused on restaurants and wholesale. And he has a much smaller team. He doesn't have the big machines. He doesn't have all that stuff. And it really works for him. Like, it's perfect. He's figured it out. He doesn't need to grow it. Maybe, I don't know what his plan is right now, but we chatted about this. Like, you start to grow, and then you quickly find that the middle is really challenging. Like, super challenging, especially when you need to start bringing in all the supporting people. Yep. Really starts getting tough.
Yep.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
It does. And I think when I hear you say the middle, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like when you're being in that place without having the intention of choosing, have you chosen small or big? When you're just trying to kind of figure it out as it's growing, and then you get stuck in the middle, and then you're not getting the benefits of either the small or the big.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you're just treading water. You're spending as much money as you're making, if not worse. Our growth plans have always been very, like, they are growth plans. We know, or we have projections that, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to try to get to this point, and we're going to lose this much money as we get there. So we have to bring in this much capital to cover us, go through the sort of ups and downs of the season or whatnot. But yeah, not doing it intentionally can certainly, and that's unfortunately, oftentimes people find themselves where they get picked up by somebody, they get an article, suddenly all these eyeballs are on you. There's someone that I've been chatting with and just helping out a little here or there, and she's actually going to come down and work in our mold shop because she experienced that and suddenly has all these eyeballs on her and her work, and she's trying to figure out what to do, and that's really, really challenging.
Yeah, it's the flip side of the coin to what everybody sees on Instagram and dreams of, right? Like, oh man, if I could just get featured here or do that, that would solve all the problems, not realizing it's a whole nother set of problems that come with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. I am resisting the urge to ask you about those growth plans and finances because I realize we're coming up on an hour here, and that sounds like a whole different conversation for a whole nother chunk of time. Is there anything about Eastfork, whether it be the business model, the way you guys function, whatever, I mean, it could just be the Instagram, who knows, but that you wish the audience that you guys have and the tiny little listenership that we have here, that you wish people knew about Eastfork?
That's an interesting question that I'm not very prepared for. No, I can't think of anything, which is a cop-out. I'm sorry, I'm blanking. Maybe that feels so crappy. No, we can't end on that note.
If it helps, I would kind of frame it. I think a lot of the people that tune in for us are those independent makers who are trying to figure out, who are either doing it on the weekends or the side hustle, or are trying to figure out how to get into full time. How do I do? They just, all they're dreaming about is, how do I do this full time? Yeah. And with my background in photography for the past 11 years, I very quickly saw, like, it's not going to be what you think it is. And how can we shed some light on, okay, here's the reality of it. And is this still what you want, or is the side hustle? Because I guess the full-time vision is so glorified that sometimes I tell people all the time, if somebody else can still pay your healthcare and you get your hands in the mud enough to satisfy you, like, that's not a bad place to be.
Yeah. Something changes when the thing that you're doing that is bringing you all of this joy, when you have to wake up and do it every single day. And your relationship to it will invariably change. And that's not bad or good, but you need to be prepared for that. Yeah, when something like, I love to fly fish, and I would not want to be a guide and take people on fishing trips all day, because it would change my relationship to fly fishing, which is something that I do. It brings me a lot of joy and peace. I don't do it very much, obviously, but one day I'll do more. But thinking about turning that into a work, that doesn't feel like a great move. But if what you really want to do is be a printmaker and make prints all day and do that, then you absolutely should. You just have to get clear with yourself. Health insurance is also really nice. So yeah, it is a personal journey, and you may walk into it and then walk back out of it, and that's fine too. Or you may walk into it and your whole life opens up before you, and you're going to be bombarded daily with issues and problems, and there's not a separation. That can be the hardest thing, I think, is that there's very little separation between your life outside of work and your life in work. Connie and I struggle with that like extra because we're married. And so we have to be very intentional about when we're talking about things and when we're turning off. But that is something to think about that it will very quickly become all consuming, and you're going to be writing emails all night. You're going to be working all day. And if you love it, then great. But you may not.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, Alex, thank you so much for the time. I don't think I need to ask you to tell anybody where to find you online, but I guess for people that don't know, let's just do it for posterity.
Sure. You can find Eastfork at eastfork.com or at Eastfork Pottery on Instagram. I'm Alex Matisse at Instagram if you care to follow me for some weird reason.
Don't make Connie create more Instagram content for you. Come on.
No, I'm trying to create more content so she doesn't have to create as much. That's something we're trying to do, is actually figure out how do we pull Connie out of some of that stuff, which is a whole other thing.
That'll be a whole nother conversation.
Yeah. Well, I hope that it was helpful and interesting.
And that wraps up episode 123 of the Maker's Playbook. Clearly, Alex and I chatted a lot about the importance of having a vision for your business and how that vision drives so many of the day-to-day decisions when a million things are flying at you. If you're looking for a little help on how to answer all the myriad of questions you have floating in your head when it comes to your own business, whether that business be a weekend side hustle, full-time, or frankly, even still just a daydream, be sure to click the link in the show notes to download my free PDF, The Savvy Owner's Quick Guide to Smart Decisions. This guide is built to help you create context around so many of the questions we ask other makers online. Should I use Etsy or my own website? Is Squarespace better than Shopify? How do you? What about? All of these questions are important, but the right answer for you, specifically you, depends on the context of your life. And, just as Alex and I discussed, the goals for the vision of your business. Download it for free now by going to makers-playbook.com/guardrails, or just click the link in the show notes when your hands aren't covered in mud. If you enjoyed this episode, I would so appreciate it if you left a quick little review on whatever podcast app you use to listen. But also, more importantly for our makers community, if you think another maker friend would like to listen to this chat, as well as the many others we have from the last 7 months, would you just go ahead and wipe that mud off your hands right now, hit pause, and snap a quick screenshot to share on Instagram? Be sure to tag me at The Maker's Playbook and Alex at Eastfork Pottery or at Alex Matisse so we can send along our thanks. If you have your own favorite makers, potters, or other artists you'd love to hear from, or if you have other business questions you'd love to hear discussed on the podcast, feel free to send me your suggestions direct to my inbox at rebecca@makers-playbook.com, and I'll work on queuing up an episode. In the meantime, go get back to making your dreams a reality, because together, we've got this.